Dry Guy Gamer Podcast.
Yeah. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crosswalk Podcast. Today we are going over historical contradictions inside the Quran mainly. Because I couldn't really find anything on any of their other religious books, so I just went basically off the Quran, where they say certain things in the Quran that don't line up with what we know historically. So there's a lot of things that I didn't put in here because it was iffy on whether it was meant like the way people think it was, because like there's things like the one that I did put in here that I kept seeing people saying about was that they didn't have people put on crosses, I think it was crucifixions or something like that, hanged basically back in Egyptian times when Joseph was over in Egypt and stuff. But I'm like, when I was looking through those verses, it very well looked like it could have been just someone putting someone through a pine tree, because there's the pike thing. I forget what that way of killing is, but basically where they put someone on a pike to have them bleed, basically hanging to death, whatever. And you can do that with smaller pine trees, but that it's just not something I think we could be 100% sure of. So there are some things that are not in here because of things like that. But I'm going to go ahead and get started with this. I don't know how long this will be. The first thing I want to talk about was that they say that David created the coats of mail, which is chainmail. So in Surah 34, 10 and 11, it says, "Indeed, we have granted David a great privilege from us, commanding, O mountains, echo his hymns, and the birds as well. We made iron moldable for him, instructing, make us full-length armor, perfectly balancing the lengths, and work righteousness, O family of David. Indeed, I am all-seeing of what you do." So for those of you who don't know, chainmail is basically little little bits of steel, maybe like that big. I don't really have anything really measured, but about that big, for example. It's just little links of steel gone within inside each other. They did not have that kind of marksmanship back then. They were not that, and they didn't use steel in that small amounts to make that back then as well. We don't have any evidence of any chainmail up until the Etruscans had the earliest historical evidence and they were in the 4th century, so 400 years after Jesus. So that's about, I want to say like 700-800 after David, maybe even more, because there was a longer period between Jesus and David. As well as the Celts are believed to have popularized it in Rome. So we believe the Etruscans made it and the Celts used it and popularized it, the chainmail stuff. And so there's no way that David could have had chainmail back then because it wasn't made back then. There are some people who say, well, what about Goliath's armor? Because it's in the Bible, it's described that way, and it's translated that way. But if you look into it, it is not chainmail, but it's actually scale armor, which is made from bronze plates sewn into a leather or cloth jerkin, which is the leather of an animal, which was common during the Bronze Age. So that was a common type of armor, where they'd have the leather with bronze plates on the outside, and that was very defensible, but they did not have chainmail back then. That is a completely different thing, and that is, I think the scaled armor is probably more durable than chainmail, just because it can take heavier shots, where chainmail basically just stops cuts from getting through as much as well. But the next point I want to go over is Joseph's brothers sold him for a few dirhams. The problem with that is dirhams did not exist back then. Dirhams were based on the Greek and Ottoman drachm, probably butchered that pronunciation, and those were not used until the 12th century. That's 1,200 years after Jesus, and whoever knows how long before Jesus was when Joseph lived. So there's no way that they had dirhams back then, and I don't even know where the Quran got that they were using dirhams. Some say the word dirham here is meaning weight, but it is clearly referring to the coin and not the weight of money, because that is another translation where it's the weight of money. But if you look at the verse, I didn't write it down, I don't know why, it says, the way it's laid out says the coin. They later sold him for a cheap price, just a few silver, oh wait, here it is, Surah 12:20, or chapter 20, what? I don't know what that is, but Surah 12:20, it says, they later sold him for a cheap price, just a few silver coins, only wanting to get rid of him. That is the translation from, because I looked at the original translation of, I think it's Arabic is what the Quran translated from. If you look at the translation into English, it is silver coins, not dirhams. So there's that. The next thing is a Samaritan in Egypt. This one mind boggles me because the idea of a Samaritan wasn't even portrayed back then. Samaria, which is where Samaritans come from, didn't even exist until Israel was conquered by the Babylonians. But yet here in the Quran and Surah 20:85 through 87 and 95 through 97 both say that both speak of a Samaritan living during Joseph's time of Egypt, and it's just not even possible because it was do I have the king? I think Sargon II was the person who conquered northern Israel, but this is the first, when northern part of Israel fell, he's the one who came in, conquered, and he built these cities to make the area called Samaria, and that is where the Samaritan people came from, because that's when they became to exist. So there's no way that they could have been around during Joseph's time back then. It is, here's what 20:85 through 87 says. It says, we have indeed tested your people in the absence, and the Samiri, which is translated to Samaritan, has led them astray. So Moses returned to his people, furious and sorrowful. He said, O my people, had your Lord not made you good promises? Has my absence been too long for you? Or have you wished for the wrath of your Lord to befall you? So you broke your promises to me. We did not break our promise to you of our own free will, but we were to carry the burden of our people's golden jewelry. Then we threw it into the fire, and so did the Samiri. And there's no way for them to be around back then. And Sargon II, as I said, was Syria. I can't remember what country it was. The Assyrian king who established Samaria after they conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. So there's that. This one, there's actually two facts about this. I couldn't find a verse where it said this, but there's somewhere in there, there's a verse that says that Alexander the Great found where the sun sets. I don't know where they got that idea, let alone that's not even possible, because the sun doesn't set in one specific place, just the earth rotates around the sun. Or if you were back in Greek times, the sun went around the earth. But either way, you can't find where the sun sets. This actually is what I'm mainly talking about, is where he it talks about where he builds a great wall of iron. And Al-Kahf 1896, it says, which is chapter 18, verse 96, it says, bring me the blocks of iron, then when he has filled up the gap between the mountains, he ordered, blow. When the iron became red hot, he said, "Bring me molten copper to pour it over." It wasn't a great wall of iron, because that would be even more of a feat, but it was a great wall of copper. Mind you, this would be insane if someone did that today. We thought back like 200, 300 years ago that building a bridge out of steel was insane. It'd still be insane today to see someone build a wall between two mountains out of copper. And yet the Quran claims to state that he did this back in before they had major ways to mine out the copper and stuff. They built a giant wall of copper to defend this valley uphill that were getting attacked by barbarians. So this is 330 BC. There's not a possibility at all that they could get that much copper or even build that big of a wall. He also never mind. That was verse 86, I guess, where he talks about finding where the sun sets. I didn't think I wrote that down. The last point I want to go over is the fact that they deny the crucifixion of Jesus. There are multiple historians who say that you can't be a scholared historian or an honorable historian if you don't believe that Jesus lived and was crucified. Those are the two major things that we know about Jesus, along with a couple other things like the disciples believed that they saw Jesus after he died, and that they were willing to die for it too, and there's like a couple other things as well. But we have more proof that Jesus lived and was crucified than we do that Julius Caesar ever existed, than that Alexander the Great even existed, and all that stuff. Tacitus, a Roman historian, said Nero, that in a letter he was writing from Rome to somebody, I don't know who, says Nero fastened the guilt on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace Christus, which is Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered from extreme penalty during the reign of at the hands of Tiberius, Pontius Pilatus, and a most mischievous superstition. This, checked for the moment, again broke out, and not only in Judea, the first source of evil, but even in Rome. So there's, in here is where it says suffered the extreme penalty. It is referring to the crucifixion. And not only does it tell us and give us some proof that Jesus was lived and crucified, because it talks about people who followed Christ and people, they called them Christians as an insult back then, but it was also based off of his name, Jesus Christ, or Christus, as it was in the Greek. As well as it gives us historical accuracy, because it says he was killed during the reign of Tiberius. I think it was Caesar, I don't remember his last name, but and that he was at the hands of Pontius Pilatus, which verifies the Bible, because in the Bible it speaks about Pontius Pilate being the one who kind of basically, I think it was led the trial he basically did, where the Jews voted to either free him, or I think it was Barabbas. And so there's that. There's Josephus, a Jewish historian, who wrote, "About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, for he wrought a surprising feats. He was the Christ. When Pilate condemned him to be crucified, those who had come to love him did not give up their affection for him. On the third day he appeared, restored to life, and the tribe of Christians has not disappeared." So there are things out there that say this note has been tampered with, but Josephus, even though he I think they said that he wasn't a believer in Christ. I do think that looking at this, they say, I know they say that some Christian later came on and tampered with the letter, but that really doesn't make sense to me. Why would you tamper with just a random letter that a historian wrote? I think there's more of he's struggling with his beliefs at this moment, because if you look, he's like, about this time there led Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man, because this man performed miracles that no one else could do. He fed 5,000 people with, was it 5 loaves and 3 fish, or something like that, 7 loaves and 3 fish? He did miracle after miracle, supposedly, according to non-believers, supposedly making people no longer blind, making the lame to walk, healing the sick, getting rid of leprosy. He did so many feats. And so I think it's more, Josephus is just struggling with his beliefs, where he's like, I don't believe that Christ is the Messiah, but I also see what he said and what he preached, and see his miracles. And so he's like, I don't know. But this also tells us that Jesus was crucified, and that he heard, or at least back then, there was a rumor going around that he was resurrected. So that is 2 things there. This is a proof for the resurrection as well. But next we have the Babylonian Talmud, which says, on the eve of the Passover, Yeshu was hanged, which hang is a synonym for crucified. And for 40 days after the execution took place, a herald cried, he is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed Israel to apostasy. Yeshu, or Yeshua, is the Hebrew name for Jesus, as we've spoken about in previous podcasts before. As well as, it also shows that he did miracles, because they call it sorcery. They thought he was somehow doing magic with this. They couldn't believe the things he was doing. And so they called him a sorcerer, and it led to Israel to apostasy, where it went against their beliefs, and so they were like, he's got to die. They were planning on stoning him. But Roman soldiers got involved, and they threw him in jail, and they found the man not guilty, but they decided to leave it up to the people. What do they want? And we all know how that turned out. They put up him, they put up Barabbas, a known serial killer who killed hundreds of people before. And they're like, who do you want set free? Everyone shouted Barabbas, and Jesus was the one who was tortured, beaten, and later crucified. The next one is Lucian of Samosata, a Greek satirist. It says, the Christians worship a man to this day. The distinguished personage who introduced their novel writes, and was crucified on that account. It was impressed on them by their original lawgiver that they were all brothers from the moment that they were converted and denied the gods of Greece and worship a crucified sage and live after his laws. So they worship someone who introduced their novel rights. He was crucified for it, meaning you can tell that's who they're talking about, Jesus, a crucified sage. It's just basically the sorcerer that the Talmud, I think, the Talmud was talking about, is the same sage that Lucian was talking about. Mind you, Lucian was a Greek, so he believed in all these Greek gods, and so when there were people in Greece who were worshiping Christ, it was an abomination, because in order to worship Christ, you had to deny these other gods. And so the whole Greek religious system was basically you have to worship all the gods, because all the gods each deserve their own temple and worship and this and that, because you have a god for the sun, the grass, the sunlight, the wind, the waters, health, everything. And so it was shameful or dishonorable, and even imprisonable if you didn't worship all these gods. And so people hated the Christians for this. We have other sources too that talk about Jesus' life and crucifixion. Tallis, a secular writer. We have years later, Mara bar Serapion, a Syrian philosopher. There are people who talk about Phlegon's writings, which we only have little bits and pieces of now. We can't find them all. But they talk about his writings about the crucifixion. He was mentioned by other writers in their books about his writings about the crucifixion in Jesus' life. We have Christians who were widely ridiculed for worshiping God who let himself be killed. Why would you ridicule someone about their God being killed if Jesus wasn't killed and that's the one they worshipped? You also have no ancient critics of Christianity argued against either Jesus' existence or the crucifixion. Nobody debated it for years. But now people are starting to be like, well, he didn't live, he didn't die on the cross, he didn't die at all, he wasn't even a person. There's more proof that he lived as a person and was crucified than anything known to man. We have more evidence of that than any other thing historically. And so those are the couple things that I pulled out of the Quran in this segment. There are other things I could have pulled out too. There's some I wasn't sure about, and others I didn't want to go on forever and ever because I could keep pulling out different things in history that are wrong with the Talmud, but not the Quran. And so yeah, I hope you guys have learned something. If you have any questions or if you have any debates on like some of these things here, go ahead and leave them down in the comments, and I will try and get back to you. But I don't think we really have any announcements, and yeah. So let's pray. Dear God, I pray that you might be with everyone listening, that you might help this reach people out in the world so that they might learn the truth. Lord, I pray that you might help us to keep searching for the truth and help us to find you and help others to be, I guess, enlightened, or what, I don't know the exact wording, but Lord, I thank you for all that you do, and I thank you for being in our lives and helping us with this podcast, Lord. And I pray that you might help us to be a blessing to the world, Lord. I pray these things in Jesus' name, amen.